Hashtag the setting and initial tension. The sun was high, baking the manicured lawns of the university's central quad. But the light was perfect, that golden, late-afternoon glow photographers always chased. Today was graduation day, and for me, standing there in the heavy black gown with the hood draped awkwardly over my shoulders, it felt like the physical manifestation of 4 years of sweat, instant ramen, and sheer, stubborn willpower. The air hummed with celebratory noise. Popping corks, distant cheers, and the constant, mechanical whir of cameras. We had chosen a particularly scenic spot near the old clock tower, where the ivy-covered stone provided a classic, dignified backdrop. My parents were beaming, my mother constantly dabbing her eyes, my father offering firm, proud handshakes. I felt a surge of genuine accomplishment, a weight lifting from my chest. This was my moment. Then she arrived. Sergeant First Class Eleanor Vance, my older sister, stood out immediately. While the rest of us were cloaked in floppy, academic robes, she was crisp, rigid, and immaculate in her military dress uniform. The perfectly tailored khaki, the razor-sharp creases, the polished brass. It all spoke of a world far removed from the carefree chaos of a university campus. She moved with a calculated economy of motion, her boots clicking precisely on the cobblestones, a stark contrast to my own slow, meandering pace. There had always been a quiet, persistent tension between us. Eleanor was 7 years my senior. When I was navigating the anxieties of high school, she was already deployed overseas. When I was drowning in philosophy essays, she was leading a fire team. Her life was defined by discipline, sacrifice, and duty. Mine she seemed to view as softer, less consequential. I often felt she saw me as a perpetually needy kid, incapable of true grit. I resented her distant, judging gaze. She seemed to resent my easy path. She didn't offer a hug or a bright congratulations. She simply nodded once, a tight, professional gesture, and stationed herself next to my father, arms crossed over her chest. The warmth that had suffused the moment instantly chilled. Even though she was here, a part of me wished she wasn't. Her presence, always so intensely present, somehow managed to shrink my achievement, making it feel less epic, less deserved. All right, one more set. The hired photographer, a young woman with a harried expression, called out, "Graduate center frame. Eleanor, maybe just stand a little closer to your brother? Family portrait." Eleanor sighed, a barely audible yet profoundly exasperated sound. She took one step closer, but her body language remained closed off, her gaze fixed over my shoulder, as if already spotting a threat or a tactical inefficiency in the landscaping. I smiled stiffly for the camera, trying to ignore the proximity of her tension. Just get through this, I told myself. 1 minute and it's over. The photographer crouched down, fiddling with her lens. Perfect. Just hold that. It happened in a blur. Without warning, without any change in her expression, Eleanor shifted her weight. Her hip swung out, not a shove designed to knock me over, but a sharp, deliberate bump, a physical displacement that was too forceful to be accidental. It caught me off balance, sending me stumbling a step sideways just as the photographer clicked the shutter. "Hey!" I protested, irritation instantly flashing into anger. I regained my footing, my triumphant pose ruined. What was that for? The photographer lowered her camera, looking confused. My parents gasped slightly. Eleanor didn't apologize. She didn't even look at me. She simply looked forward, her jaw clenched, her eyes burning with an emotion I couldn't decipher. Was it contempt? Frustration? She looked less like a proud sister and more like a guard ordered to eject a trespasser. The damage was done. My beautiful, hard-won moment, the perfect shot, was ruined. The initial joy I felt was replaced by a familiar, searing surge of sibling rivalry and wounded pride. She had come all this way not to celebrate but to sabotage, to remind me in the most petty and public way possible that she was in control, that she was different, and that my accomplishments were somehow less valid than hers. "Seriously, Eleanor?" I hissed, my voice low but vibrating with fury. "Is this really how you want to act on my graduation day?" She finally turned her head, fixing me with a look that was genuinely unsettling. A mask of cold control stretched thin over something volatile underneath. Before she could reply, before I could unleash the torrent of 4 years of pent-up annoyance, my father's voice cut through the thick tension. It wasn't a shouting voice. It was the low, dangerous tone he used when he was absolutely serious, when his authority was total. "That is enough," he said, stepping between us. His eyes swept over Eleanor's rigid posture and my own angry confusion. He took a deep breath, and his gaze settled on me. "Before this gets any worse, you both need to hear something. Something you should have known a long time ago." He paused, letting the silence hang heavy, broken only by the distant sounds of celebration that no longer felt like they belonged to us. "You're fighting over nothing," he stated, his voice quiet, drawing us both in. "And you, son, owe your sister an apology for the last 4 years, because the tuition you just spent 4 years paying off didn't come from us." My confusion was absolute. I looked from my father to Eleanor, whose cold mask finally seemed to crack, a flicker of vulnerability showing beneath her military discipline. "Eleanor paid it," Dad finished simply. "Every semester. Every single penny. Hashtag the confrontation and the father's intervention." My blood was still hot from the deliberate, spiteful shove. The initial shock had given way to pure, unadulterated rage. I stepped around my father, my eyes locked on Eleanor's. The camera, the graduation gown, the surrounding celebratory noise. It all faded into a meaningless buzz. All that mattered was the sudden, sharp, and inexplicable cruelty of her action. "I asked you what that was for?" I demanded, my voice tight and low, vibrating with the effort of not shouting in front of the handful of family friends still milling nearby. "Are you seriously so miserable that you can't stand to see someone else happy for 5 minutes? On my graduation day." Eleanor's face was unreadable, a stone mask carved from discipline and contempt. She didn't deny the intentionality of the push. She just stood straighter, which I hadn't thought possible. Her chest adorned with ribbons and badges, rising slightly with a deliberate, deep breath. "It was unprofessional, sir," she bit out, the military honorific dripping with sarcasm, emphasizing my lack of structure and discipline compared to her world. "You were leaning. You look weak in the frame. Fix your posture." The insult stung far more than the physical contact. Weak. That was her constant, underlying accusation. "Oh, I look weak?" I retorted, taking a step closer. "And you look like a hero, right? A decorated soldier who comes home just to sabotage a family moment? You ruin my pictures and then you try to pull rank on me? We're not in your barracks, Eleanor. This is real life. This is my life. And you just made it worse. Like you always do." My mother, her eyes wide with panic, reached out a tentative hand. "Children, please stop it. Not here. Not today." But the fuse was lit, and years of unspoken resentment were finally igniting. I was tired of being judged by her impossibly high self-imposed standards. I was tired of feeling small in her shadow. "Why did you even come?" I challenged her, my voice rising despite my efforts to control it. "If you despise me and what I do so much, why waste the PTO? Just to make a scene? Just to make sure I know you're still better than me?" Eleanor finally dropped her cold gaze, and for a split second, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not contempt, but an intense, aching frustration, almost pain. She opened her mouth, perhaps to lash out or perhaps to say something entirely different, but the words were halted by her own strict discipline. Instead, she just shook her head, a slow, deep breath escaping her lips, and her arms tightened across her chest, a physical barrier erected against me. "You have no idea what you're talking about," she muttered, her voice low and dangerously controlled. "You never do." This dismissal, the casual assumption that I was too clueless to understand anything, broke the last thread of my restraint. I was ready to launch into a full tirade, demanding she explain her baffling malice, demanding an apology for the 4 years of silent competition and her current display of hostility. My father, who had been a silent, granite presence between us, suddenly moved. He didn't raise his voice, but the change in the atmosphere was immediate and absolute. His hands, large and steady, came down firmly on both my shoulder and Eleanor's, not pushing, but commanding stillness. "That is enough. Stop," Dad said, his voice quiet, yet ringing with more authority than any shout. The surrounding noise of the quad seemed to dim, focusing all attention on our small, furious triangle. He looked directly at me, his eyes full of a somber seriousness that instantly quelled my fury, replacing it with a knot of apprehension. "You want to know why she's acting like this? You want to know why she came? And you?" He shifted his gaze to Eleanor, whose discipline finally seemed to break under his stare, her chin dropping slightly. "You need to let him know the truth before you both tear this day apart." He took a slow, dramatic step back, ensuring he had both of our attention. He looked from the military uniform to the academic gown, a profound sadness etched on his face. "Your sister didn't come here to ruin your day," he started, his voice barely a murmur. "She came here because she is proud of you, son. More proud than you could ever imagine." I stared at him, convinced he was completely missing the point, or perhaps losing his mind. "Proud? After that push? And that little stunt just now," Dad continued, ignoring my bewildered expression, "was the clumsy way she expresses her own fear and frustration, because everything you have achieved today, everything that Black Gown stands for, required a sacrifice from her that neither of us ever told you about." He paused, his eyes meeting mine, then shifting to my mother, who simply nodded, confirming his words. "When you got that acceptance letter, son, we were broke. Not just tight. Asterisk broke asterisk," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "Your mother and I were figuring out how to tell you that you'd have to wait a year, maybe more, or go to community college. We couldn't do it." He looked back at Eleanor, and a deep affection softened his gaze. "Your sister didn't want you to know. She called us the next day from her base. She said you deserved the chance. She said she'd handle it." I felt a cold dread creeping into my stomach, a sudden, horrifying premonition of what was coming next. The entire tuition, all 4 years, every book, every fee, every damn thing you needed to be here today, Dad concluded, the final words dropping like heavy stones. "It was paid for by your sister's enlistment bonuses. She paid for your college, son. She paid for this diploma." Hashtag the shocking revelation of the tuition payment. The air seemed to solidify around us. The words that had just fallen from my father's lips, simple, declarative, and utterly devastating, hung heavy in the golden sunlight. The noise of the distant graduation party, the chatter of the remaining well-wishers, the click of a camera focusing on someone else's happy moment. It all receded, replaced by a roaring silence in my ears. "What?" I managed, the word a dry, rasping sound, barely a whisper. I looked from my father, whose expression was earnest and sorrowful, to Eleanor, who now refused to meet my gaze, staring instead at the polished toes of her boots. Her posture, usually so unyielding, seemed to have taken on a subtle, defensive slump. "It's true, son," Dad reiterated, his voice gentle now, stripped of the earlier authority. "When you were accepted to the university, we were overjoyed, but terrified. We didn't have the funds. The small nest egg we had planned on had vanished after the market crashed the year you finished high school. We were preparing for the hardest conversation we'd ever had with you." He paused, letting the weight of that financial desperation sink in. I remembered those months, the strained silence at the dinner table, the way Mom would quickly hang up the phone whenever I walked into the room, the sudden frugality that I had attributed to belt-tightening. I had been so wrapped up in my own excitement over acceptance letters that I had missed the deeper currents of fear swirling around my parents. "Eleanor called us 2 days later," Dad continued, looking at my sister with an expression of profound, tearful pride. She had just re-enlisted for another tour, a particularly demanding one, which came with a substantial bonus package and better combat pay. She told us to keep quiet. She said she'd wire the money directly to the university's finance office every semester. As long as we promised to let you believe you were on a combination of grants and loans that we were secretly co-signing. I felt a sudden, sharp physical pain in my chest, a crushing mix of disbelief and guilt. I thought back to the quarterly emails from the bursar's office, the neat, official tuition-paid receipts I'd casually forwarded to my parents, thinking they were agonizing over the interest rates. I had never once questioned the source, never once considered the magnitude of the sacrifice. I had simply accepted my opportunity as a given. My eyes snapped back to Eleanor. The soldier who had just moments ago seemed like my cold, petty rival, now stood revealed as my clandestine benefactor. I saw the tight lines around her mouth, not as contempt, but as a struggle to maintain composure. The push on the quad, the incident that had triggered this entire crisis, now took on a completely different context. It wasn't malice. It was a desperate, clumsy release of pressure. The money, I started, my voice catching. All 4 years? The apartment deposits? The textbooks? Everything? Mom confirmed, finally stepping forward and gently placing a hand on Eleanor's rigid back. She kept meticulous track. She didn't want us to use her base pay, only the bonuses and overseas incentives. She insisted she didn't need it. She was living on base, she said. But we know what that kind of commitment costs, what it took for her to earn that money. A terrifying realization swept over me. The extra tours, the dangerous deployments, the time she had spent completely inaccessible due to her duties. It wasn't just the path of her career. It was the price of my education. Every challenging rotation, every sleepless night I had spent studying for finals, she had probably spent under far more serious duress to ensure the next tuition payment cleared. The silence returned, but this time, it was filled with the deafening sound of my own past words echoing in my mind. Every casual complaint I had ever made about her being out of touch, every snide comment about her easy government job, every assumption that her life was less complex, less nuanced than mine. I had spent 4 years believing I was competing with her, while she was literally fighting for my future. I took a shaky step toward her, dropping my gaze from her uniform to the ground. The smooth, heavy silk of the academic hood suddenly felt cheap, fake, and stained by my ignorance. Eleanor, I choked out. Why didn't you ever say anything? She finally lifted her head, and her eyes, usually hard and clear, were slightly wet. She looked tired, burdened by a secret she never wanted to share. Because it wasn't supposed to be about me, she said, her voice rough, a break in her otherwise flawless military bearing. It was about you. I didn't want you to feel obligated. I didn't want you to work part-time or pick a different major just because you felt like you had to pay me back. I wanted you to finish, guilt-free, like you earned it yourself. Her words were the final hammer blow. I hadn't earned it myself. I had spent 4 years feeling superior, feeling like the smart, successful one who navigated the world better than his rigid, distant sister, when in reality, my entire foundation was built upon her silent, enormous sacrifice. The contempt I had read in her eyes moments ago was likely just the immense strain of watching me be ungrateful, unseeing, and completely oblivious to the depth of her love. The push, the rudeness, the impatience. It all made terrifying, profound sense. She wasn't hostile. She was protecting a secret that was exhausting her, furious that I couldn't simply enjoy the gift without provoking her, and maybe, just maybe, frustrated that her huge, painful gesture of love was destined to remain forever unacknowledged. #, the shift in perspective and the graduate's guilt. The truth detonated in the small, charged space between us, scattering my previous reality into meaningless fragments. I stood motionless, the diploma tube now feeling like a hollow, fragile thing in my grasp, a symbol of debt I hadn't realized I owed. My entire worldview, which had centered on my independent struggle and hard-earned success, inverted violently. I looked at Eleanor. Not the judgmental, cold soldier I had despised seconds ago, but Eleanor, the sister, the selfless giver, the silent guardian. The revelation had stripped away her military facade, leaving her vulnerable and exposed, betraying the immense effort it must have taken to maintain that secret for 4 long years. The wave of anger that had consumed me moments earlier was instantly extinguished, replaced by a scalding, heavy flood of shame. I thought back to everything. Asterisk the conversations, asterisk the time she'd called from overseas, tired and clipped, and I'd spent the call complaining about a demanding professor or the cost of new textbooks, oblivious that my complaining was literally about the money she had risked her life to earn. Asterisk the distance, asterisk the feeling of emotional distance, the perceived lack of pride from her. I had interpreted her silence and reserved nature as judgment, when it was actually the suffocating burden of keeping her enormous gift a secret, coupled with the fatigue of her demanding service. Asterisk the push, asterisk the incident that had just sparked the confrontation, the aggressive, baffling shove. Now, it wasn't an act of malice. It was a failure of control. She had watched me, beaming and oblivious, celebrating a victory she had financed through personal hardship and danger. That tension, that immense, unspoken love and sacrifice, had manifested in that single, clumsy, physical outburst. She wasn't trying to make me fall. She was trying to jolt me, to break through the veil of my ignorance, or maybe just to release a pressure she couldn't bear anymore. Eleanor, I whispered again, but this time the name was an offering, a plea. My voice cracked. I had no idea. The sheer scope of her sacrifice crashed down on me. People don't just wire tuition. That money represented months of dangerous deployments, missing holidays, living under intense stress, and signing contracts that tied her life to the military for years longer than she might have wished. She had traded her time, her safety, and her immediate future so I could study history of art and finally graduate without crippling student loans. The guilt was suffocating. I had been so arrogant, so self-righteous in my fury a minute ago. I had accused her of pettiness, of ruining my day, of being cold and unsupportive, when she was, in fact, the most supportive person in my life, quietly funding my entire foundation while enduring my ungrateful attitude. My eyes scanned her uniform, seeing the ribbons and badges with terrifying new clarity. They weren't just decorations. They were collateral. You hate me, don't you? I asked, the fear in my voice genuine. Eleanor flinched at the word. Her disciplined exterior finally crumbled, and a single tear traced a path through the dust on her cheek. I don't hate you, she said, her voice strained. I've been so proud of you. Every time Dad showed me your grades, I was proud. But watching you stand there so happy, so oblivious to what it cost, and knowing I couldn't even explain why I was so stressed out and tired all the time, it was too much pressure. I couldn't hold it in. She looked down at her hands, which were clenched into white-knuckled fists. I know it was stupid. It was an immature thing to do. I just wanted to shake you and say, look at me. Look at what I did for you. Her admission of immaturity, a word she rarely used, was more revealing than any shout. The highly controlled soldier had lost control for one brief, desperate moment, not out of malice, but out of sheer, overwhelming emotional overload. My father gently placed a hand on my shoulder, a silent nudge toward accountability. I felt a visceral need to apologize, not just for the past minute, but for the past 4 years of my dismissive attitude. I had missed the forest for the trees, focusing on my own petty grievances while she was carrying an immense secret burden for my benefit. I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to steady the turmoil inside me. The confrontation was over. The truth had laid bare the true relationship. Not rivals, but a benefactor and a debtor. And the emotional debt I owed was far heavier than any loan I might have taken out. The anger was gone, replaced by a deep, aching tenderness and a humbling realization of my own profound error. I had mistaken her sacrifice for coldness, her discipline for disdain. I had been wrong about everything. My own eyes were stinging now. I didn't care about the photographer or the remaining family. I needed to fix this, to acknowledge the weight of her love immediately. I needed to move from guilt to gratitude. Hashtag the reconciliation and the new meaning of graduation. The oppressive silence finally broke. My entire focus narrowed to Eleanor, standing rigid and shattered beside me. The guilt was an unbearable weight, but it was time to move past shame and into action, into acceptance and, most importantly, into profound gratitude. I took a final, deep breath, letting the tension drain out of my shoulders, and slowly moved toward her. My academic robe suddenly felt like a heavy, undeserved cloak. "Eleanor," I began, my voice thick with emotion, barely above a whisper. "Please, I am so sorry. For everything. I didn't mean just the past 5 minutes of confrontation. I meant the 4 years of my ignorance, my judgment, my casual ingratitude. I didn't just misunderstand your actions today. I misunderstood you completely. I thought you were distant. I thought you resented me. I was wrong. Completely, unforgivably wrong." I paused, gathering the words that felt inadequate to convey the depth of my feeling. "That sacrifice, what you did, the money you sent, the secret you kept, that wasn't just tuition. That was my future. You gave me this opportunity, and you did it without ever asking for a thank you, without ever making me feel beholden." I looked her straight in the eye, trying to pour all my newfound respect and affection into the gaze. "You didn't just pay for the books and the classes. You gave me the chance to pursue my passion without the crushing fear of debt. You gave me my freedom. Thank you, Elle. Thank you so much." Eleanor's strict posture finally, irrevocably failed her. The single tear had been joined by others, tracking clear paths down her face. Hearing the full, direct acknowledgement of her sacrifice, the truth she had guarded so fiercely seemed to break the last of her military reserve. She didn't speak. Instead, her head dropped, and she let out a choked, desperate sound that was more pain than cry. For the first time since she had put on that uniform, she looked small, exposed, and utterly exhausted. I didn't hesitate this time. Dropping the diploma scroll to the ground, I reached out and wrapped my arms around her, pulling her close. It was an awkward embrace, hindered by the stiff gown and her rigid uniform, but it was genuine. Eleanor didn't respond immediately. She remained stiff for a moment, her discipline fighting the instinct. Then, slowly, tentatively, her arms came up and wrapped around my back, holding on with a sudden, powerful grip. She buried her face into the shoulder of my gown and let go. The strong, unyielding soldier allowed herself a moment of profound, cleansing vulnerability, her body shaking slightly as she wept quietly. My mother rushed forward, her own eyes streaming, and joined the embrace, wrapping both of us in her arms. Dad placed a comforting hand on Eleanor's immaculate, ribbon-adorned shoulder. The moment of confrontation had dissolved into a moment of raw, powerful familial reunion. The secret was out, and with it, the years of cold tension had finally melted away. When Eleanor finally pulled back, wiping her eyes with a practiced hand, her face was soft, relieved, and undeniably proud. "I didn't want the drama," she managed, offering a watery smile that was the most genuine I had seen from her in years. "I just wanted you to get the chance I didn't have." "I know," I whispered, reaching out and gently touching the bronze pin on her collar, an acknowledgement of the true cost of my education. "And I promise I won't waste it." The hired photographer, sensing the shift from conflict to profound emotion, had wisely kept her distance. Now she tentatively approached us. "Everything all right?" she asked softly. My father, wiping his own eyes, chuckled lightly. "Everything is more than all right. It's perfect. We just needed a small reset." He picked up my fallen diploma tube and handed it back to me. "Let's take this picture again." And this time, he looked from Eleanor to me, a fierce pride shining in his eyes. "Eleanor, you stand right next to him, where you belong." We posed again beneath the clock tower. This time, there was no tension, no forced smiles. Eleanor stood close, her arm linked through mine, not in formal military discipline, but in familial affection. She was still stiff, still a soldier, but her stance now emanated not judgment, but the hard-won pride of a sister who had succeeded in her long, secret mission. When the photographer finally captured the shot, the picture was perfect. It wasn't just a photograph of a graduate. It was a testament to sacrifice, reconciliation, and the quiet, fierce love of a sister. The diploma, once merely a symbol of my own work, now represented something much deeper, the ultimate, defining act of my sister's devotion. My graduation was no longer just my achievement. It was our shared victory.